The research community have noted for decades that there seems to be a connection between coyotes and Sasquatches. A lot of people were saying maybe the coyotes are following the Sasquatches around and waiting for scraps after the Sasquatch kills a deer or something like that. I think it's the opposite.
From catching a glimpse of the legendary creature on his trail to having a terrifying encounter with the fabled creature, here is what happened with the latest encounter with the legendary Bigfoot. Over the years, there are certain mysteries that still cling onto the imagination of man. Is Donald Trump's hair his real hair or a wig? Is Slender Man really out there haunting people? If Slender Man is really out there, can we also claim that Bigfoot is also wandering through the many woods and forests found in Pacific North America? The last one is perhaps the most persistent mystery that we have today. For decades now, people have emerged from said woods with tales of encounters with this strange creature. Yet no one can categorically say that this creature isn't just the stuff of legends. Add the fact that some of these accounts have been proved to be hoaxes, and you can see why some people just can't accept that there is this massive hairy bipedal creature running around in our woods. They certainly don't take every photo or video of Bigfoot seriously as well.
With two partners, only one man got out. They saw a bipedal figure that stank really bad, leaving big footprints, and they shot at it, which is a bad idea. Don't shoot at a Bigfoot. They don't like it.
With all the hoaxers and the pranksters making their rounds over the course of time, can you really blame anyone for doubting the authenticity of any media claiming to have the details of a run-in with the legendary cryptid? That is why we are compelled to take things seriously when even the doubters tell us that a certain video of the legendary cryptid could be legitimate. Let's take a look at one or two of such videos. Peace in the middle of the woods. Our story starts with Jake, an outdoor lover who was reported to be living in the thick forest of Handel County for about 8 years. This must have been because he ran a small logging business in the area, and as such, he grew to enjoy the quiet and solitude of the woods when he and his men weren't chopping trees down. As a result, he had become quite accustomed to the area. Not only had he seen a ton of wildlife and became familiar with these woods, he had also come to love the fauna found there as well. Some could say that it was truly his little piece of paradise. Little did he know that this spot was also a piece of paradise to someone or something else. Well, one morning, Jake would find that he wasn't truly alone in those neck of the woods. On this Sunday morning that we are talking about, Jake decided to take a look at what his 6 trail cameras may have recorded after he left them out in the woods for a while. All he did with these cameras was take recordings of the wildlife in the area, while also keeping an eye on the activities that take place in some parts of the woods that he couldn't visit all the time due to the inconvenience. In order to retrieve one of his cameras, he had to go 2 miles into uncharted territory in these woods.
When he turns and looks at the camera and points it, "Did you see that?" And then he immediately looks back and watches the animal as it walks away. I find that many times hoaxers focus on the camera itself instead of at this amazing thing that they just saw that was unexpected right in front of them.
Untouched and serene, Jake figured that making his way to his camera would be uneventful. After all he had seen in the area were some deer and a bear or two from time to time. Well, things would change slightly because although he would not have any strange encounters while he made his way to retrieve his trail cam, he would find that his trail cam had recorded something that anyone would consider to be strange. Once Jake was home, he plugged the trail cam's SD card into his laptop in the hopes that he could catch a glimpse of the creatures that wandered through that neck of the woods when no one was around. Rather than catching a glimpse of the deer that usually grazed grass in that area or the raccoon that was looking for somewhere warm to rest its head, Jake would come across something that was even stranger. As he watched the clips in the SD card, Jake would be shocked when the footage showed him this strange creature that was making its way through the woods early one morning. The sun hadn't even come up yet in the footage, but this tall, hairy creature was stomping around intimidatingly, so much so that Jake still felt uneasy, as if it was in his presence in the video. The interesting thing about this clip is that it wasn't one of those unclear videos of Bigfoot that we have seen in the past. No, it was as clear as day, even though the footage was captured at night. And it was almost undeniable that Jake may have been watching a real video of Bigfoot as it was wandering through the woods. Looking at the creature in the footage, you could say that it was about 7 feet tall. Aside from that, it was covered in so much fur that anyone would think that this was a bear. However, Jake had seen his fair share of bears, and he would not mistake this creature to be one. Maybe it was the shape of the creature's body. It had long arms and long legs that wouldn't be found on a bear. It didn't have those slumpy shoulders that you'd find on bears. This creature had the broad shoulders of a big man, but this creature's shoulders were even broader. In fact, aside from its larger than usual proportions, you couldn't blame anyone for thinking that this creature was human. Well, that and the massive amount of fur found all over its body.
One big difference between the skunk ape and Bigfoot. The skunk ape is said to stink of rotten eggs and moldy socks. But we want to know, do these videos pass the smell test?
We may have hinted at this a few moments ago, but another reason you couldn't convince Jake that this creature was human was that the creature was wandering around in the woods at about 4:23 a.m. in the morning. At least that is what the timestamp in the footage tells us. Well, we didn't get a glimpse of the creature for too long because it only hung around for about 47 seconds before it fled the scene. However, we were a bit lucky here because AI helped us view the clips in the clearest frame of the footage. With this, you could actually make out some of the features of the creature's face. Just take a look at its deep black eyes. Black and deep, they were almost hidden away by the creature's heavy brows. However, looking at the creature's eyes, you almost had a feeling that this creature may not be as feral as we may ordinarily think. In fact, rather than looking wild or scary, it actually looked like a curious giant. You could almost even feel the calm intelligence in its eyes. Truly, this was one of the strangest recordings out there when it comes to the legend of Bigfoot. Understandably, this footage left Jake in a state of shock and awe. Apparently, he was so shocked when he saw the footage for the first time that he actually sat there staring at his screen for almost 2 hours. I don't really blame him. Many of us may have had a worse-off reaction. After all, they have told us for many years now that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Maybe that is why he felt that this must have been someone in a costume playing a prank on him. He even hoped that this was some sort of error or glitch. Maybe it rained one of those days while the trail camera was out there, so it may have malfunctioned or something. Despite all these logical scenarios or assumptions, Jake couldn't deny what he was looking at. The more he looked into the camera, especially the footage that AI cleared up, the more he was convinced about what he saw. He may have just recorded real footage of Bigfoot with his trail cam. This is amazing because he had been installing his trail cams out there for about a decade up until that point in time. As such, he knew how to install them so that he could make sure that they weren't focusing on bad angles or areas that could cause digital issues. As such, he knew that this was real. Amazing stuff.
All of the Aborigines down there have drawings on the walls of caves depicting these things. They're prevalent in their storytelling traditions as well. But then the settlers came in the late 1700s, and they too started running into yowies, which is another very strong indicator that they're a real biological animal.
That said, as amazing as this was, Jake was filled with so much nervous energy that night, he just couldn't sleep. Everything made him jumpy, almost as though he expected the actual creature to show up like some sort of boogeyman because he had seen actual footage of it. It was so bad that by midnight, he realized that he wasn't going to get any sleep. Every creak caught his attention. Every gust of wind that hit his window made him feel like Bigfoot was stalking him. As a result, he figured that his only course of action was to head back to that exact spot. Maybe he would be able to see things for himself, or better even, run into the legendary cryptid itself. This time, though, he figured that he would get the best results if he went out there with a camera. That way, he could get answers for himself and the entire world. With that in mind, the moment the sun came up the next day, Jake loaded up his truck so that he could finally head out there to confront the legendary Bigfoot. After telling his neighbor that he was heading out to the woods so that he could take part in some night photography, our boy was off. Sure, he could have told this neighbor of his plans. Heck, that would have been great because then he could have some backup as well if the neighbor was that kind of guy. However, this neighbor, who went by the name of Pete, already thought that Jake was a bit odd because he lived in those woods by himself. I wouldn't blame him for coming to that conclusion, to be honest, because who actually does that? If he had said that he was going out there to catch a glimpse of the fabled hominid, Pete would have considered him to be a lost cause, and we can't have that, can we? With that in mind, Jake set off on his journey to find Bigfoot after that brief chat with his neighbor Pete. After a nice long drive, Jake found that he had gotten to a certain point in those woods. However, after that point, he had to make his way through the forest on foot. After walking for about a mile with all his equipment, he finally set up a camp in a spot that was about 100 yards off the spot where the trail cam recorded this Bigfoot. At least from there, he had a great view of the clearing, and with any luck, our legendary cryptid would make his way back to the same spot. With that in mind, he remained hidden in the bushes so that he could wait for the return of the creature. All he needed the creature to do was to make its way back to the spot. That way, he had a great chance of making history as the man who finally brought the legendary Bigfoot out of hiding. Funnily enough, though, nothing would go according to plan for Jake and his Bigfoot stakeout.
I drive down this dirt road pretty much every day. I have been doing it for over 10 years, and around 11 o'clock one night, I had a road crossing. And I mean, it maybe took 2 or 3 steps, it was across the road, but what struck me was the height of it. I mean, the thing must have been 8 to 8.5 feet tall. I mean, I was that close to it, and it was massive.
After spending some time in those thick bushes, Jake noticed that everything seemed to be calm out there. Sure, he could hear the activities of the wildlife in the area, but nothing eventful seemed to be happening. In fact, the hooting of the owls and the rustling of the leaves as tiny woodland creatures rushed by almost seemed therapeutic to him. However, things seemed to change around 11 p.m. in the night. All of a sudden, Jake noticed that the forest had gone completely quiet. You could actually hear a pin drop if he had one. What happened to the owls and all the other forest creatures that had been bussing around only a moment ago? Something odd was occurring, and Jake knew exactly what was going on. Or at the very least, he could assume that something massive was making its way to the area, because the only time that the forest goes quite like that is when a huge presence is making its way to a certain spot. With that in mind, Jake must have been bracing himself for something big, and this proved to be the right instinct because before he knew it, he heard the snap of a stick. The break in the silence in the woods was followed by the sound of slow, steady footsteps. Eager not to miss out on what was going on, Jake lifted his camera and switched it to infrared mode so that he could record what was going on in the darkness and the thick trees. Unfortunately, though, the footsteps would come to an end. This was how it was for about 10 minutes. Just as Jake was about to give up in disappointment, he would be triggered once more when he heard this low growl. It was such a strange growl, too, because it was combined with what sounded like a whistle. At least that is how Jake explains it to be. The frightening thing about this sound for Jake was not that it was made by some animal in the woods. Sure, that part was there, but what really got under his skin was the fact that he was familiar with the sounds that were made by the creatures in the woods. Be it a bear, a deer, an owl, or a coyote, Jake had heard it all. What he had never heard was this strange growling whistle. To make matters worse, the sound didn't come from one spot either. No, it seemed to come from several points in the woods at the same time. If Jake didn't know any better, he'd have sworn that he was being surrounded by more than one strange creature at that point in time.
Bigfoot is generally reported to be a very large, very furry, hominid creature. Something like a person, but not a person.
The scene was so gripping that it took a while for Jake to realize that he had been holding his breath for quite some time. The moment he decided to release it, he noticed that something in the atmosphere of the scene changed immediately. Before he could do anything, a strange shape moved at the edge of the trees. It actually looked like a shadow that had broken from the tree line. However, Jake changed his mind about that within moments, because he noticed that this shadow was massive in size and weight. The way it also moved also told him that there was no tree. Thanks to his infrared camera, Jake was able to see the creature in the darkness. Thanks to this, Jake realized that he was actually looking at the same creature that turned up earlier in his trail cam. The only difference was that this time, he was looking at the real deal, and now he could make out its features. Tall and massive, Jake could tell that it looked like a much bigger and stronger version of a human being. Then there was that thick fur that we mentioned earlier. This time, Jake was able to tell that it was black and thick enough to protect the creature from the cold winds through the woods. To make things even more convincing for Jake, he noticed that the creature moved in a way that told him this was not a prank. The creature just seemed to move in this fluid, natural way. No, this was no prank. Yes, Jake was actually in the same neck of the woods as the legendary Bigfoot at the same time. Unbelievable. After overcoming this initial shock, all Jake could do was watch the creature as it was in its element. And that is what we did for the 5 or so minutes that it stood there in the middle of the woods, as though it was listening out or looking for something. Maybe it was even looking for the intruder that was trying to catch a glimpse of him with his infrared camera. At one point, Jake could even swear that it looked right at him, or at least in his direction. Jake tells us that he could even see its eyes in the darkness of that night. The interesting thing about it was that its eyes weren't feral. They almost seemed sentient, as though there was something more behind them, maybe something that was almost human. Jake could swear that they held eye contact for some time. It was almost like the fabric of space and time froze as the pair were locked in a fixed daze with one another. Whatever the case may be, this intense moment must have only lasted for a few seconds because before he knew it, Jake was startled back to life because he realized that the creature had suddenly started walking towards him. With each step, Jake was losing more control of himself and his camera. His instincts told him to run, but all he could do was stare at this creature as it got closer. That's how Jake was able to make out more of its ape-like features. To him, it looked like a mix of a gorilla and a man. After confirming that it was not going to win any beauty contests, Jake must have been relieved when the creature came to a stop.
But it was in 1958 in Northern California. Guys building a road found footprints around their gear when they would come back in the morning, and a guy named Jerry Crew made plaster footprints of these tracks, and they dubbed it Bigfoot. That was where the name first originated and got into American vocabulary.
However, when he realized that the creature was studying him, Jake understood that the creature wasn't scared of him, and that, in its own way, was even more unnerving. Despite his best efforts, Jake was truly frightened when he realized that it was drawing closer. To make matters worse, his camera died, so he lost sight of the creature. By the time he used his backup batteries to switch the camera back on, Jake realized that the creature was gone. What an unsettling scene. At least Jake managed to get 6 minutes of footage of Bigfoot. That's more than most could say they ever had of the legendary creature. With that in mind, the next thing for Jake to do was to gather the nerve to head back home. After some time, the nerve did come back, so Jake began his hike back to his truck. Before he got far, though, Jake was shocked to come across the creature's footprints. What an event! After taking pictures, Jake eventually made his way back to his truck. Still slightly unshaken by the entire event, he slowly made his way back home. He was still so frightened that he was constantly looking over his shoulders. Once he got in, the first thing he did was to transfer his recording from his camera to his laptop so that he could watch it. Incredibly, it was clear enough for Jake to watch the entire event all over again. Captivated by the creature's movements, Jake decided to show the clip to 3 experts. They too were impressed with the realistic nature of the creature in the recording, especially after they ran their footage through the latest state-of-the-art AI technology. It proved to be so impressive that they did not dispute the events as he described it to them. With that in mind, Jake made his way back to the same spot 3 days later. He wanted to reclaim the trail cam that he left in the area. Maybe it would even have more footage of our fabled cryptid.
The preeminent Bigfoot creature that we have in the United States, located in the Pacific Northwest, that very word, Sasquatch, comes from a Salish tribal word that means wild man or hairy man.
To his shock, Jake found that all his trail cams had been disassembled and scattered all over the floor. To make it even stranger, all the memory cards in the cameras were gone. Finally, to make sure that Jake got the message, something or someone had gone through the trouble of carving a strange symbol where his main camera used to be. We're talking about 3 vertical lines that were crossed by 2 horizontal marks, almost like a hashtag. What was clear, though, was this was no mistake. Someone had done this on purpose. It was definitely a message. To take things up a notch, Jake found more footprints in the area. Not only were they similar to the ones that he found the other night, it looked as though they were left behind by more than one of those strange creatures. What a fascinating string of events. Could one of them be out there? With that in mind, Jake sent out the videos to even more experts, who in turn ran the clip through their AI tools to establish some more veracity. Despite this, some figured that this was a hoax. However, as the video got more popular, more people told Jake about their own encounter with this strange being and what could be his family. As such, Jake knew there were more people like him out there. Maybe they could work together to finally bring the legend of Bigfoot to an end once and for all. From catching a glimpse of the legendary creature on his trail cam to having a terrifying encounter with the fabled creature, here is what happened in the latest encounter with the legendary Bigfoot.